Washington State Department of Revenue. He brings more than 20 years of information technology experience with deep knowledge in cybersecurity. He has played pivotal roles as a security architect, supervisor, and most recently is the interim CISO. His expertise in crafting a robust security program has been instrumental in safeguarding DOR's vital information assets. Before shifting his career focus to security, Carlos honed his technical skills across the technology sector, including critical positions such as system administrator at a leading managed cloud provider and senior technology manager for a managed service provider. These roles have not only shaped his technical acumen, but also his leadership capabilities in managing complex technology operations. Carlos has always been driven by a genuine passion for cybersecurity. This passion is highlighted in his many years helping to organize prominent security conferences to advance the cybersecurity community. And of course, without further ado, the man himself, Carlos De Leon.
Thank you, Jen. That's excellent. I feel so proud of all my accomplishments. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I have a full agenda here. I'm going to try to get through most of it. I have about roughly 24 slides. So about 2 minutes each should give us a full hour, 50 minutes or so for Q&A at the end. Let's get started. So next slide. Oh, so before I move on, those are the topics we're going to be talking about. But before I get to the meat of it, I wanted to set a baseline knowledge. I know this is open beyond ISIT to the whole statewide. So I kind of want to build a baseline knowledge of what is cybersecurity, what is all this that we're talking about, cybersecurity awareness. So I have 3 things I want to cover: CIA triad, the cyber kill chain, MITRE attack, and the ransomware attack ransomware attack flow. So the first one here, cybersecurity CIA triad. So if you go to school and learn about cybersecurity, most textbooks and most presentations will tell you that all security boils down to these 3 things: the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data or system, right? If you can zoom in and focus on the corners here, confidentiality means ensuring that information is accessible only to the authorized user who's allowed to have it, right? You don't want somebody going in there who's not supposed to have access to the data of the system. Integrity is keeping it from being modified or altered in any way. That includes being encrypted, that kind of a thing. Since we're talking about ransomware. And then finally, availability. If it's encrypted or if there's a DDoS attack and you can't access the data or system, that affects your availability. So all of these 3 things work together as our foundation for cybersecurity. Any questions? Does that ring true?
Hey, Carlos.
Yeah.
How does CIA tie into my agency's mission? I'm not an IT person. I don't really understand what cybersecurity has to do with how I support my agency.
A great question. So a lot of this is done through IS policies and procedures, but some of this is your responsibility. For example, confidentiality. You are responsible for your password. Don't share it. Don't have a group shared. If somebody says I need to log in, there's a great story about somebody at another presentation about they were cashier and it was Black Friday and they were so busy that somebody needed to do a transaction. They logged in for them on the cashier box. At the end of the day, they were short $100 or something. And who ends up owing that money? The person that was logged in, attribution. So even though it is not your day job to be in security, you have to think like security, and it's everybody's responsibility to think security. So that's hopefully a good example for you. All right, moving on. So next thing I want to cover is the cyber kill chain. This is a little dated. I want to kind of just go over it real quick. These are the steps that Lockheed Martin specifically created to explain. They took it from the military world and brought it to the private sector, trying to explain how a attack happens, right? What are the steps that have to happen for a successful attack? So then we start here with recon, where we figure out who's our target. We weaponize something. This is usually like a macro or something that you're going to click that'll get you, to the right place for delivery, which is the next step. You deliver a payload. You clicked on a link and it downloaded something to your box. Exploit is usually executing that payload. So usually that creates a backdoor, a web shell. More than likely, it's just some uh, process that's going to be doing the C2 communications. We'll get to that in the next step. So after exploit, you go to install. It installs backdoors, what have you, whatever the attacker is trying to install on your machine. Next is the C2. It's called C2 because it stands for command and control. That's where your machine, once it's infected with the secondary payload, because first payload is the way in, the attack, and then there's a second payload, which is the malware. Once it's installed and running, it'll reach out to the mothership, try to get next instructions. What do I do now that I'm here and I have access? And then ultimately the action, whatever they were after, whether it's deploying ransomware, stealing your data, stealing your passwords, what have you. That is the very simple, bare bones attack kill chain. What happened is a lot of people in the industry kind of rejected it. There was a lot of gaps and issues with it. So they went back to the drawing board. And the next thing we found out is MITRE, another company, MITRE Corporation, came out with a more detailed attack framework. And it looks like attack, but it actually stands for something. It means the ATT means adversarial tactics, techniques, and command knowledge. This is not necessarily just those simple steps, but more of how and why. It's very granular. There's a lot of little nuances there. I'll share some links at the end where you can kind of look at this, or you can search for it while you're listening to me. Um, most modern security tools now have a way to map what you're seeing to the MITRE attack, so that you know where in the process or what the next step is, or what you may have missed. If they're already at the C2 step and they're talking back to the mothership, you missed a lot of steps, right? You missed where they scanned your network, where they delivered an email to you. So you kind of have to work backwards and find what you missed. So it's kind of a much more detailed map, and it's very useful for sharing information across boundaries to other security folks. I found this thing has these MITRE attacks capabilities, and then you could share those. We call them IOCs, indicators of compromise. Questions before I move on? Is that making sense? Are we
Oh,
all on the same?
I've got one for you.
Hit me.
I'm at my agency. I don't do a lot of IT stuff. Sound familiar? But I see this thing called lateral movement.
Oh yeah,
Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Because I don't think what I do is very important.
yeah. So maybe it'll flow into this next one. I skipped the animation, but so a ransomware attack using that knowledge that we just gained with the kill chain and the MITRE attack. These are the different steps that ransomware goes through. And one of them, if you look here, lateral movement, about 4, 5, 6, 7 steps in. I guess I have a mouse I can point to. So SMB lateral movement. What does that mean? That means that if the infection starts at a frontline worker, let's say your receptionist, that receptionist doesn't really have a lot of power on the network. They're not a domain admin. They're not NIS. All they can do is launch the browser and maybe a enterprise app here or there, but not a lot of power. So what lateral movement is, the bad actor will use whatever foothold he gets, the beachhead, to move and find credentials or open shares on the network or other vulnerabilities on the network. He'll do a network scan and find out what else is out there. Hopefully, he doesn't have permission to do a network scan. But if he does, he'll find the next level up of a user that has more power, more privileges to escalate. Just blipped back. Okay. So that's what lateral movement is. It's usually it's a step ladder way of promoting their permissions and rights to do more on the network. And then eventually, if you look at the chain all the way to the top, it says obtain domain admin privileges. That's game over. That's the ultimate goal. If you're a domain admin, you have total control of the environment. Then you can stage your ransomware on a network share and use PowerShell or what have you to deploy the ransomware, and everything gets infected. So um, hopefully that makes some sense. I'm not talking too much tech talk there. All right, next slide. Now we get into the actual meat of the conversation here. What are we talking about for malware and ransomware? What is our case here? So this slide is showing over time the financial losses due to cyber attacks, not just ransomware, but all cyber attacks. So if you want to, I want to point out some of the trends here. We started back here in 2018 at 2.7 billion. And as of 2022, that's 10 billion. It's an exponential growth, obviously. Doubled within 2 years, and it kept going. That's important. I looked it up. Some of the forecasting predictions. It's my number. There we go. It says by 2031, they predict that it's going to be 265 billion. So another, 10 years, it'll be 265 from 10 billion to 236, 265, sorry. So it's bad, it's going to get worse. So you should, if you're in security, you should figure out what is my next steps? What do I need to know? I have another chart here. If you know me, I'm not a fan of PowerPoint. I don't like walls of text, so I try to use graphs and pictures to tell the story. So hopefully this is a little more entertaining than me reading slides. Same period that we were looking at for all of the cyber attacks, we're looking here at ransomware specifically from the same period, 2018 to 2024. That one ended at 2022, the previous chart. But what I want to point out here is it looks like we're having a decrease in ransomware. But the truth is, if you join extortion and ransomware, they're actually growing. Because now we're seeing as of last year, it's not just the ransomware, they want you to pay ransomware to unlock your files. They're extorting you. They're saying, hey, we stole your data. Even if you pay us to unencrypt it, we're going to sell it on the black, on the dark web, unless you pay us extra. Or even if you don't, we're still going to sell it because we want our money. So they're pivoting. It's no longer just one threat. It's a combined threat. And that again, skyrocketing. All right, next slide. So how do they get in? These charts, by the way, I have the resources. I'll share them at the end. This one and a couple of previous ones were from Sophos, State of the Ransomware 2024, just published a few months ago. I also use the Verizon data breach report. Yeah, data breach report 2024 also. So I'll share those at the end so you can. They're great reads. I love Verizon. They're very tongue in cheek. Yeah, I like their writing style. You learn a lot from it. So how are they getting in for the kill chain? The biggest one that Sophos is seeing here year over year is exploited vulnerabilities. We've heard this before in my talks at ESG. Ralph's talked about it. Patching is important. It's one of those foundational cyber hygiene things you need to be doing. It's not glamorous. It's not, it's not an easy win. It's the Sisyphus story of you roll the boulder up and the next month it's back down. You have to roll it up again. It's hard work. It has to be done, but that's gotta do it. The next one there, compromised credentials. That kind of pairs a lot with malicious email and phishing because some of those emails that we're getting in phish is fake login pages where they harvest those credentials. But you can also get hit some other direct, if you reuse passwords, you use your work password on a public site, that public site gets compromised. There's your compromised credentials for work. Malicious email, we talked about those earlier. They could have macros, URLs to malicious sites, things like that. But the takeaway here is patching, compromised credentials, and email. Those are your vectors you should be worried about. This one I wanted to highlight. It's the same, how do they get in? But we stand here with the third one down from the left, state, local government, 93 responses out of the pool at 24%. This is how many were exploited or used they use exploit a vulnerability to get in. It sounds low, but if you compare it to the top three here, higher ed, lower ed, and energy and oil, who are the ones you see in the news nowadays, or you used to last year? Those were the ones, right? Schools, hospitals, and oil. The reason is they're very highly regulated, or they don't have funds, they don't have the money, so they don't patch as quickly or as fast as they should. That doesn't mean that because we're in the low end, we shouldn't be as worried about it. We also have the same problem of resource and money and time. So just wanted to highlight that, the top isn't exclusive. This one comes from the Verizon data breach report. This one I wanted to highlight because they cover the CISA KVs. If you know what those are the known exploited vulnerabilities. I'm trying to think when this started. I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago. Biden set a executive order mandating that CISA improve cybersecurity for the federal government. One of the things they did is they created this catalog, the CISA KV, and what they do is any vulnerability that they see being actively exploited in the wild and is trending as something bad, obviously that's being exploited actively, they put on this catalog. And you might think these are the latest 0 days. Sometimes these vulnerabilities are months or years old. It's just the bad actors finally started using them to get in. And so it might be a vulnerability from 2022 or 2023 that gets put on the catalog. The takeaway here from this chart is that after 30 days, 85% were still not patched. This is across the Verizon pool of respondents. And after, let's see, 55 days to get halfway to patched. And then even at the tail end of it, after a year, 8% still hadn't patched known exploited vulnerabilities in their environment. That's a scary thought. We'll get to it in a few about what that means to you if you get exploited, but your focus, if you're in any position to manage patching, should be patch immediately and as quickly as you can after testing. The federal mandate for the CISA KV is 14 days for critical patches, 30 days for highs, and 90 days for mediums. They're all classified already, but you can always do some triage and figure out this high or this critical is more important than the rest. Focus on that, get it patched. So that's your takeaway. All right, time for a video. We're going to talk about WannaCry. So let me. All right. So WannaCry was bad. Like it said, it was the biggest global ransomware. It combined a lot of the baddest things that we have. The worming. It was a 0 day that was unpatched. It spread far and wide. It started in Russia. As you saw that explosion of dots, it went global fairly. In the first day, it was all over the globe. There's a lot of great books and stories if you're interested on how that even happened, how that we got to there. Um, if you want a little quick summary there, there's a lot. Well, Russia, Ukraine, they're at war now, but back then they were kind of always lobbing cyber attacks, mostly Russia, Ukraine. That one was an infection of a tax software for Ukraine. And global companies that do business in Ukraine, which is a big commerce country, were using that tax software. That was the backdoor to get in. It was an unknown vulnerability. They had attacked the tax software to get into other companies, which we'll talk about later. But keep that in mind. So here I want to take a quick pause and kind of go over the different types of malware. We've been focused on ransomware, but there's more out there. I'm going to highlight here like viruses. Those are the more traditional ones that most people think of. Old school viruses. I love this picture because of the call outs to example Stuxnet from 2010. Um, a worm there, Conflicker 2008. A worm, as you see in the red there, it replicates and spreads usually without any user interaction. It just needs network access. The virus usually requires user interaction. It's attached to a legitimate program. Viruses and Trojan horse usually interchangeable, but a Trojan horse hides within legitimate software. It's disguised in it. So an example there is Zeus, that one. Spyware, way more prevalent nowadays in mobile. So Pegasus, for example, if you've heard of that one. We talked about ransomware. Akira is another one. There's tons out there. There's even ransomware as a service these days, which we can cover at the end in Q&A. Adware, targeting adware, usually malicious adware. Superfish is a big one there. Rootkits, those are usually there to hide. They're concealed and malicious. Whatever they've done, they're deleting logs, hiding processes, things like that. Sony BMG, notorious for that back in 2005. They put it on all their CDs, so when you put your CD in your computer, you had a rootkit installed, unbeknownst to you. That was quite a story back then. I remember that. Botnets. These are zombie computers. That's usually what they're called. A big story there was IoT devices, webcams, routers, and stuff that are connected on the internet, exposed to the internet. They have a vulnerability. The attackers will take over and use them a source for DDoS attacks. Spam back in the day was sources for that. So botnets. And then finally, keyloggers there. They collect passwords, credit cards, anything that's of value. They capture every keystroke and send it back to the bad actor. All of these are malware. All of these are different facets of the same thing. Something that gets on your machine that you don't want on your machine. All right. I'm going to pause and ask any questions. Am I going too fast, too technical? All right. Moving on. So let's focus on one of the I call it the next level up, the silent invaders. An APT, an advanced persistent threat. These are usually classified as what is it? Foreign actors, another country attacking a country. If you follow CrowdStrike, they have very cute names for all these. Midnight Panda and things like that. There are non-government ones. There's crime rings and stuff that are also classified as APTs. The difference between these and the more traditional malware is that usually APTs don't want to be detected. They want to stay silent. So if you follow the life cycle here at the very end, they cover their tracks to remain undetected. They get in, they laterally move, get their privileges up, they harvest what they can, emails, files, data, whatever they can, and then they just go quiet. They stay in your network unbeknownst to you for months, maybe years, and you probably won't ever know they're there. I tell my management I can be confident I can keep out, the run of the mill malware, but if somebody targets us that's an APT, I'm not confident, at least right now, that we are protected or safe against them. That's why you have to mature your security program to the point where you can go threat hunting and go find those signs that there might be something in your network that shouldn't be there. But just keep that in mind, that it's not just run of the mill everything. Your EDR, your antivirus, and all that. They'll protect you against the common stuff. More than likely, not against an APT. Okay. So a good example of an APT. Let's talk about SolarWinds. SolarWinds was a watershed moment for cybersecurity, and especially the US, where they realized we were not as safe as we thought. Uh, they broke into SolarWinds. They put a Trojan backdoor in SolarWinds update that went to all their customers, and they sat on it. They went from March to December, very long period, to attack, move laterally, put all the pieces in place, and wait and bide their time to do what they needed to do. They were after federal government agencies, but because it was using third-party risk here, this is a supply chain attack. They caught everybody in the net, everybody who used SolarWinds, not just the target, but everybody else. So this became a pretty common trend since SolarWinds. We still see it nowadays. The latest being Log4j, things like that, where instead of attacking a victim directly, they go after a supply chain and get in through a trusted path. I don't have it in my slide deck, but we can talk about zero trust and how that helps mitigate some of that risk where you don't trust even your partners. Everybody has to authenticate. Everybody has to prove who they are and why they're doing what they're doing. But yeah, important time in history. All right, time for another video. Should clarify, I am not sponsored by any of these vendors or products. This is just really useful videos to get the point across. I don't endorse Proofpoint. So as they were saying, BEC attacks the users, not the systems. That segues into my next slide here. How do we protect against these many malware and attacks? So what I like is this traditional model of the defense in depth. You have your mission critical assets in the core, and you have multiple layers of protection. Each one represents different products, policies, procedures, things that happen at the very top layer there, the human layer. That's very important. Here's a more technical one for the geeks in the crowd. It calls out the different products. So you have intrusion detection, prevention, firewalls in the perimeter, network security is your VPNs, site-to-site connections, web content filters, endpoint protection. You have your MFA, EDR, next-gen AV, security awareness. So that's where you train your users, cybersecurity training, phishing awareness, application security. So app whitelisting, again, maturity levels probably are not at the app whitelisting level. Vulnerability scanning, web application security, your WAF type thing. Information security, data loss prevention, data encryption. And then finally, your critical asset security. Are you doing image backups, disaster recovery, business continuity planning? So all these layers work together to give you the maximum amount of at least not 100% protection, but makes it that much more difficult for a bad actor to get to your critical systems. Problem is with cloud and SaaS and everything, that perimeter is no longer your data center. It is very porous and it's moved over to the cloud, it's moved over to your users at home. So these layers are now shifting. We talked about zero trust earlier. That's one way to mitigate those risks by pivoting to a more modern landscape. So this segues into the next slide here of the human firewall. What are the why do we focus on security awareness training? Why do we need it? Why do we do these presentations for Security Awareness Month? And why should your agency be doing Security Awareness Month? Not just the month, but throughout the year doing security awareness training. That human factor, the human firewall, they're the first line of defense. If they're trained and recognize those phishing emails, the fake phone calls, the pressure, hey, CFO needs gift cards for the party. Probably should have a validation process before you buy some gift cards for the CFO. Or if an employee calls and says, hey, I need my W-2 rerouted or my paycheck rerouted. So wouldn't do my job as co-chair of the ESG if I didn't plug Fish Firewall. It is an offering by Watech, free if you are part of the allotment. We've deployed it at DOR. Had a bumpy road, but I think we're working out all the kinks. It has already proven itself in training our users to be better at detecting all forms of social engineering and fish and all that. So highly recommend it. All right. Going back to that defense in depth, we go all the way to the bottom where we talk about information safety, backup, and recovery. This is again from the Sophos State of the Ransomware. The reason I pulled this chart out is because I want to read it out. It says, there are two main ways to recover encrypted data in a ransomware attack: restoring from backups and paying the ransom. Compromising an organization's backup enables adversaries to restrict the victim's ability to recover encrypted data and dials up the pressure to pay the ransom. So this chart shows the percentage of attacks where the adversaries went after the backups. They wanted to go delete or destroy the backups. It's in the 90s for everybody. So even though you have backups, if they're connected to your network when they break in, you're more than likely going to have your backups encrypted or deleted. So have a plan for that. I was a backup admin for a minute when I was in enterprise admin. We had a rule, 3-2-1 rule: 3 backups, 2 medias, 1 offsite. And yesterday I learned there's a new one. It was 3-2-1-1-0. It's 3 backups, 2 types, 1 cloud, and what was the 0? What was the 1? Actually, I should have written it down. The last one was 0 errors on recovery. That was the 0. But anyway, 1 immutable. That was the other one. 1 immutable backup. You want to have backups that are accessible and protected against attack from the bad actors. So keep that in mind. All right, I'm finishing way earlier than I thought. Okay, Q&A. Do we want to open up chat, or are we just going to stick with Q&A here? I also had some prompt questions here for those who can't come up with questions. These questions are also good to ask your leadership.
I'll go ahead and open up the chat.
Okay.
I got it.
Awesome.
Hi, Carlos. Following on what you were just talking about, if you pay the ransom and they give you everything back,
Mhm.
talk a little bit about that timeline on restoring yourself to functionality, even if you do get everything back.
That's a great question. Yes. I wrote these down for a tabletop I just recently did. The most recent local ones here in Washington were the Seattle Library. They got ransomed. It took them about a month to recover. And then the Port Authority got ransomed and took them about 3 months to recover fully from the ransomware. They didn't pay the ransom, but and obviously they didn't have backups because it took them that long, so they had to rebuild from scratch. But yes, even paying the ransom is not a guarantee. I've seen stories where I said I was going to talk about this at the end. A lot of bad actors who have successful ransomware tools will sell access to it. It becomes ransomware as a service. If I'm an attacker, but I don't have the skill sets to write my own encryption utility, I'll go buy it on the dark web, and somebody will give me access to a SaaS dashboard where I can just target a company, infect them, get paid, and then I paid the person who rented it to me a piece of the gains. But a lot of those are fast. They're not quality controlled usually. So the encryption may not be reversible, even if they give you the key. It may not work every single time. If you're in a agency like myself who has compliance, FTI, CGIS, uh, HIPAA, all of those, it doesn't matter if you pay the ransom and recover the data. You're in a breach situation. You have to notify. You have to pay for credit monitoring and a bunch of other, maybe probably fees to a monitoring agency. So it is not a fast, easy return to operations. It will take time. It will take a lot of money. Um, a lot of people talk about cyber insurance. I try not to use that as a crutch. My management don't depend on that money, don't count on that money. Insurance will find every excuse not to pay out. If you haven't followed all the due diligence, cyber hygiene to the letter, they will probably use that as an excuse not to fund the payment. Or on the flip side, if you do call them and they take over and help, they may pay the ransom for you because they might do the math and say that's cheaper than us cleaning up your mess. And then that opens up a whole can of worm of legality. If you pay a ransom to a group that works out of Russia and they're sanctioned, are you violating federal law for paying terrorists? You know, probably best not to get into that rock and a hard place. So yeah. Any other questions?
I'll keep throwing questions at them if no one volunteers.
My bunch. You're all experts. I love it.
Carlos, how much would it cost you to have immutable backups of every single data asset for DOR?
Well, we rank them. Going back to that DR scenario, disaster recovery, business continuity, there's a thing called the business impact analysis that you should be doing. You should rank your systems as to how critical they are for you to continue doing your mandate, whatever your agency's mandate is. So you shouldn't have to restore everything 100% in case of a disaster. You should prioritize the critical systems. And yes, how much does it cost? I can't give you a number. But it was expensive. We again, not endorsing anything, but we just transitioned to Rubric, which is a SaaS backup solution. But they build themselves as a security company, cybersecurity company, because they have tools for security. They can scan for IOCs inside the backups instead of scanning the production environment. You can scan the backups and look for indicators of compromise. They have a fuse that if they detect ransomware in the environment, they cut the line and the backups are protected from being compromised or deleted. So there's a lot of built in there for those threats. It was not cheap, but for our needs, for what we need, our critical Atlas is our tax software. We collect the money that pays everybody's paychecks and funds most of the budget for the year for the biennium. We want to make sure we can continue doing business in the DR scenario.
Yeah, speaking of paychecks, there have been multiple conversations I've had with people at different agencies in the last week about attempted diversions of people's paychecks. So
Yeah.
that's a like HR and accounts payable, all those, the payroll, those folks are really critical parts of our cybersecurity chain.
Yeah. So if you have anything to do with that or can help with that, the best practice there is to have, if you think back to old nuclear times where you had the two keys that had to be turned together at the same time, you should have the same thing for anything requiring finance changes. So if you need to change your payroll information, it should require two people to confirm and some kind of validation that it's really you. Um, there's, I'm sure you can sit down and brainstorm some ways of validating. Don't just take it from a phone call. Make them fill out a form on the intranet internally on the VPN, not from the public. Don't email that form in, and then have the managers maybe approve it, and the manager calls the employee and validates things like that. So many different ways that you can mitigate that. Don't trust the person calling you or requesting it, especially if they're pressuring you. Pressure is one of the big things used in social engineering. Time is running out. There's urgency. I tell my kids when you're in a hurry is when you should, or when there's an what is it? What I say? I say when you're stressed or in a hurry is when you should slow down the most, because that way you avoid future more accidents and more mistakes.
All right, we do have a question from the audience. Ricky at Children's Youth and Family asks, how do you ensure after a ransom attack, either by paying or backup recovery, somebody showing they're listening, getting those bullet points in, to make sure that the exploit the attacker has used is no longer there? I get that there's security software that can search for it, but how reliable is it? Seeing if they have worked reliably, I would assume the attack wouldn't be possible in the first place.
Yeah. Excellent question. My advice is if you are the victim of ransomware, you call the cavalry, call WATEC, call our insurance retainer. We have a retainer with, I believe, CrowdStrike, who would come in as they're called digital forensics and incident response, DFIR. They will handle the primary thing that they handle is collecting evidence. They want to preserve logs, preserve records to be able to figure out how they got in, kick them out, and make sure they don't get back in. Uh, Leave that to the professionals. Unless you're trained or have experience in that, I don't recommend that you just restore from backup and keep going, because they're just going to get back in, right? A lot of them do put in back doors for they expect to be kicked out at some point, so they'll hide some corner shell or RDP session somewhere. So you have to know what to look for, where to look, and all that. And the logs are critical for that. So call the cavalry. Don't try to do it yourself. So did that answer the question? The skills so they can scan. Yeah, so don't just rely on the software. You need the experts to go through and make sure your environment's clean and to a point. They will still not, they will sometimes they do miss it. They have to kick them out again, but they'll stay around until they are sure that it's clean.
I think that would be especially important if, they got in through a door, but then they created a new window. It's like, okay, we see where they got in through the window. Let's go make sure that their little tunnel that they made in there originally is gone too.
Mhm.
Once you know where the tracks are, you can start seeing where they were holed up, where all the Twinkie wrappers are.
Yeah. One of the big things with logs, especially in our modern day, is most of us only keep about 30 days, if we're lucky, of logs. As you saw with SolarWinds and other APTs, they're there for months, even possibly a year or more. You may not know how they got in because you erased those logs or they're gone. So definitely need the cavalry at that point to help you figure out where they're at.
I think that's where governance can help a little bit, like FTI, federal tax information. They have specific, very rigorous requirements on how long you're supposed to keep those logs, where the state requirements are much shorter.
Yeah. The FTI will require keep 7 years of logs.
Excellent recall of IRS 1075.
Like I went through an audit last year, or this year actually.
It's just like that
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah. Any other questions? George?
Looks like George.
I do have a question, Carlos. Um,
Mhm.
You being part of security, you are very well and knowledgeable about security. And I've read there is a lot of frameworks over there. There is COVID, there is NIST, there is ISO 2700, there's Intel. I'm lost. What shall I do?
That's a great question.
Come to the policy and program management office hours where we talk about frameworks all the time.
There you go.
Or the
Yeah,
HISP class. That would be a good one too.
yeah. I was sitting in on the previous talk at lunch, and he was pointing to I think it was CISA has a mapping tool that you can map your compliance with frameworks and see which ones you can check off the box with. One mitigation will make a bunch of other ones, but yes, there is a lot of frameworks out there. Which one is best for you probably depends on what you have to comply with. We have FTI at DOR, others have CGIS. Those are all federal. If you're just a small agency and just have OCIO, for example, they're more aligning now with NIST 853, so that would be probably where you would start. ISO and the other ones, those are more international. Excuse me. If you were in the private sector and you were doing e-commerce, that's where you would probably look like. If you were a multinational corporation, you want to have compliance globally and not just in one country. There's a lot of things that go into it. You want to ask your peers, look around, see what checks the most boxes with one framework. I will say one of my coined sayings is compliance is yesterday's attacks. They're not today's. Security is today's and tomorrow's attacks. Your compliance, what you're checking the box against, is what happened last time. They're not going to protect you against what's going to happen today or tomorrow. The bad guys are always innovating, pivoting. So the compliance is a baseline. You want to be able to say I did the bare minimum, but you still have to protect against the unknowns, unfortunately. Yes, somebody's putting, oh, thanks, Daniel. The tool in chat there where you can map things. Did that answer your question? I think I would start with NIST 853 for the state as a starting point. All right. Any other questions? Nobody mentioned my little pictures of Archer. Did you all see the beginning? The first slide? No? All right. Danger zones from Top Gun, if you're old enough. If you're a millennial, Archer is where you probably heard Danger Zone first. I put this in the meeting earlier. I identify as a geriatric millennial, so I'm in both worlds, Top Gun and Archer, but I lean more towards Archer. So, all right. I hope I haven't been talking to myself the whole time. You're all very quiet.
We're listening attentively.
Oh, all right. Got
I
8 more
concur.
minutes. Anything you want me to cover more deeply out of the deck? No. Do you like the style? Do you like the pictures? Try to avoid writing walls. In fact. All right. Thanks. I'll do my last slide. What? Thank you.
Nice.
Where's the music?
Come on.
He had it taken down to a DCMA copyright
Yeah, I don't want to violate any
or
YouTube
DMCA.
DMCA rules. Yeah, I'm already pushing the envelope with the embedded videos. I don't know if how those are going to fly when.
Pushing the envelope. I see what you did there.
All right, let's wrap it up. Thank you, folks. Thanks for attending. I will put my deck out for WATech on the Cyber Awareness Month site, and it is pretty large with all the videos and pictures, but go for it. I think the recording will also be up there.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Look forward to seeing you in the next one.
Thank you.